That's Fred Hammond with Keep On Praising right here on Urban Praise. I'm Roy Patterson along with Eric Townsend. And in studio, I've got a gentleman that I met about a year ago. He spoke at a banquet that was put on by Vision Nehemiah. And I was just so impressed by his heart for God, his heart to see the body come together. When I had an opportunity, based on my friendship with Tommy Lee, to have him come here, I said, man, hey, he can come any time. He's the Reverend Dr. Soong-Chan Rah, and he's associate professor at North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago. He's also the author of the book, The Next Evangelicalism. Doc, welcome. Welcome to Urban Praise.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
I'm so glad to see you. You put your finger on reconciliation the way I've heard few people do it. Let's start off with why this is a passion for you, and then let's get a definition going.
Sure. Well, racial reconciliation is a passion for me because it's the community that I've lived in. It's the ministry that I've been involved in. I've been really blessed to have mentors in my life from different faith, different races and different cultures, and that has really shaped who I am. And I don't think my life and ministry would be where it is unless I had African-American pastors, Native American pastors, Latino pastors, people from outside of my ethnic group who really spoke into my life and challenged me on these issues. So for me, multi-ethnicity and cross-cultural ministry and racial reconciliation is something that I've tried to live out. It's not just kind of abstract concepts, but it's something that God has really led me to in my life story.
Give me a little definition then. How do you break down racial harmony, racial reconciliation?
Yeah, racial reconciliation or multi-ethnicity, those are very popular terms right now. They're out there in the community. Right. People talk about it. There are a lot more books written about it these days. Okay. But I do want to make a distinction between what I perceive to be genuine reconciliation that is focused on the biblical justice versus just the reconciliation because it's the popular thing to do.
Gotcha.
The way I've often described it is if you think about the way American multiculturalism has been described, you think, for example, about the melting pot, right? That's what was the picture of multi-ethnicity or racial reconciliation. Right. You throw all these wonderful flavors together and you boil away all the wonderful flavor and you reduce it to cream of mushroom soup. And it just feels bland and looks bland, but that's the way we looked at America for a long time. We do away with all of our culture. Well, that form was rejected, and now we talk a little bit about the salad bowl. And in the salad bowl, you bring all these different vegetables together, and you have a jalapeno, you have a napa cabbage, you have kimchi, you have greens, you have all these wonderful different vegetables together. But what you end up doing sometimes is you drench it with a creamy ranch dressing. So everything still tastes the same. Right. So that's not reconciliation. That's you bring people together in the same room, but ultimately you're covering them up with one particular culture or ethnic expression. And so when we talk about racial justice, it really moves us beyond just let's hang out in the same room together. That's not bad. It's a wonderful thing. Sure. But how do we really move into this dialogue where we are reconciled to each other on a historical, cultural justice level, and not just hanging out with each other?
That is a big deal. And to be honest, a lot of folks don't know how to do that. And that's not just whites or blacks or Latino or Asian. A lot of us are so used to celebrating Christ on Sunday morning at our location with our people. If folks come to our location, we're like, oh, great to see you. And hey, this is how you clap 2 and 4, and this is the beat. Or you go to another location, this is how you clap 1 and 3, or we don't clap here. Appreciate you coming, but thank you so much. But that's not what we do. And it feels like assimilation has become the word of the day.
Yeah, well, that's the image of let's just drench everybody in the same dressing. So even though we're different and we have different cultures that we're bringing, ultimately we want everybody to respond in the same way. I think genuine racial reconciliation, genuine multi-ethnicity really needs to acknowledge how is God working in your communities. And so different communities respond differently, different communities act differently. So we need to make sure that we're acknowledging that and saying this is all part of what God is doing in our communities. And so this is what's wonderful, though, about racial reconciliation, about multi-ethnicity, because we're learning from each other aspects of who Jesus is that we wouldn't know because we have our cultural blinders on. Okay. And like I said, I've been really blessed by African American mentors in my life who helped me to look at the gospel in a way that as an Asian American I couldn't look at. I didn't have those kind of experiences. I didn't have that kind of story. And to hear the stories from my mentors of this is what it means for me as an African American to live in American society and to operate in this cultural context, that's an amazing blessing that I can't imagine doing without. And it'll be wonderful to see the whole breadth of American Christianity experience that in a very real and authentic way.
Is it possible that people do have blinders on? And I mean it like this. You what you said makes a lot of sense. It's it's like easy bake oven. All we gotta do is this, all we gotta do is that, and ta-da. But I have seen it where, and I've experienced it before, where I've been a part of a bigger organization, and I was the only African American in the room, and no one said to me overtly, the way you've worshipped is wrong, the way you've heard preaching is wrong. But since I wasn't hearing it that way,
right,
since I wasn't in that particular environment anymore, more and more I got the subliminal message: this is the right way, and what you've done has been the wrong way, or at least it's substandard.
Right.
Is that? Am I right? That do other people feel that as well?
That's a great insight. That's what I'm writing about in the book. That there is a dominant culture that's seen as the norm. This is what everybody else has to adapt to. And if you're outside of that norm, then you're an other. You're someone different. And so if you are, for example, the only African American in an all-white gathering, or the only Asian American in an all-white gathering, then you're kind of ostracized. And it's not explicit. It's not necessarily even malicious. It's just that there is a norm by which everybody has to operate. Now, what I would argue is that those norms aren't necessarily scriptural. Those norms are much more cultural. So that's what I talk about. I say, what does it mean for evangelicalism or Christianity to be captured by a particular culture and ethos, and then force others to live into that, even though that might not necessarily be scriptural? So how do you make that distinction between what is of the Bible and what the Bible says versus what the culture says? And I look at things like individualism. Is individualism a biblical concept, or is that a cultural concept? Is consumerism a biblical concept or a cultural concept? And those are things we need to flesh out and figure out, because we're really becoming a multicultural nation and a church. And yet here we are saying this is normative, and everybody outside of that is abnormal or not quite as religious as us, as spiritual as us. And those are the issues that I'm trying to raise.
All right, I'm reading through the book of Acts, and I'm in chapter 15. And at this point, Paul and Barnabas are like, wait a minute, it's wrong for us to try to make Gentiles get circumcised.
That's right.
And this is craziness, so we're not going to do that. And they're like, yeah, Peter, we heard it from Peter, now we're hearing it from you. But I could easily see how they could have fallen into saying, hey, we're Jews, we're God's chosen people. This is how God has always done it with us. And so we expect everybody else to do it. So do you think it's like a religious kind of momentum kind of thing? Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Acts 15 is just this wonderfully rich passage for us to look at when we talk about cross-cultural ministry. For one, the time that the Jerusalem Council is convened in Acts 15, what you see is a shift from a Jewish dominant faith to much more Gentiles being introduced into the faith. So around the time Acts 15 is written, you had a shift from the majority of Christians being Jewish to now the majority of Christians being Gentiles.
Sure.
And the Jews who were in that context really wanted to hang on to the power that it meant to define the church, the early church, based upon Jewish culture. But the Gentile believers were saying, well, no, it shouldn't be based upon Jewish culture. It should be based upon all the different cultures that are a part of this. So we see this parallel in the 21st century, don't we? We see that American Christianity is defined largely by Western white culture. And now we're seeing the majority of Christians becoming non-white. We see that in the world, definitely, and we're definitely seeing that in the U.S. as well. So now do we hang on to these norms that existed 50 years ago, where if you were to ask who's a typical Christian in the U.S., well, that person was an upper-middle-class white person living in the suburbs.
Exactly.
But that's not true anymore. We have the hip-hop church. We have second-generation Asian-American churches. We have English-speaking Puerto Rican churches. And this is all part of the changing face of Christianity. And in the same way that the leaders in Acts 15 had to say, we need to find a way that we can find new cultural expressions for the church, not tied into the Jewish culture. That's some of the changes we have to see in the 21st century. And again, very dynamic stuff, very exciting stuff, but very challenging as well for those who are used to having church a certain way, those who are used to operating in a certain way.
Join the discussion at PROFRAH.com.